remain.
Hello and welcome to a Mutant Manifesto episode 1. This is me reading an essay I wrote in college about 6 years ago. I'll be reading it to my friend Carson, who will be coming in about 10-15 minutes. It sets forth a lot of the principles that undergird this project, and I wanted you to hear it as well as our discussions about it. So welcome to a Mutant Manifesto episode 1, Mutant Community Building in Indra Sinha's Animals People. In Indra Sinha's work of fiction, Animals People, the real-world town of Bhopal, the site of the most horrific factory meltdown in living memory, is filtered into readers' lives by narrator Animal, an inhabitant of its fictionalized version, Kofpur, Terror Town in Urdu. Affected by an analogous explosion and similar health defects, such as tumorous growths, non-typical minds, and lung problems, the inhabitants of Kofpur fight a similar battle for justice, recognition, and reparations from the American Union Carbide Chemical Company as their real-world Bhopali counterparts. But, unsurprisingly, despite their efforts, both the fictional and real-world communities have failed to earn much aid from either the Indian or American governments, nor the company they seek reparative justice from. Having been altered inexorably by a form of neocolonialist capitalism, their unimportance to the global upper class has been revealed. The global humanist has used their homes as buffers for dangerous capitalist enterprise, and having poisoned them, banished them largely from the zone of what is considered properly vital. However, Animals People, its narrator and its author, provide examples of mutant community building in the wake of apocalyptic change, a type of solidarity both wide-ranging and specific, which changes with the toxic environments around it while seeking practical alliances across normative boundaries. The Bhopal disaster took place on December 2nd, 1984, when the American-owned Union Carbide Company's pesticide plant exploded, spewing methyl isocyanate into the air, water, and the bodies of the inhabitants of the nearby shantytowns. Over 500,000 people were exposed to this toxin directly following the explosion. An estimated 558,125 were injured, and around 16,000 have died to it. It continues to take a toll on the bodies of Bhopal's inhabitants. The cause of the explosion is debated. The Indian government and local activists cite inattention and maintenance oversight, whereas the Union Carbide Company attribute it to an intentional act of sabotage. Various legal deliberations stagnated any reparative action for 5 years, with the American court recommending an immediate $5 million USD relief fund agreed to by the UCC and denied by the government of India, which requested a settlement of $3.3 billion. 5 years after the disaster, the company provided a mere $470 million and funded a hospital dedicated solely to aiding its victims. UCC's owner, Warren Anderson, was tried for manslaughter in India and was detained upon his arrival, but soon was released and fled back to America, where he was deemed a fugitive of justice. He was brought into a court in the U.S. for crimes against humanity, but the case was dismissed in 2012. He died in 2014, having avoided virtually all penal measures. Contrastingly, 7 Indian employees who had worked at the plant during the time of its explosion were found guilty of causing death by negligence in 2010 and paid just over $2,000 each and served 2-year sentences despite their advanced ages. Animals People takes place in a fictionalized version of Bhopal, Kofpur. Its narrator, Animal, is crippled during the explosion and can no longer straighten his back, forcing him to walk on all fours. After being named Animal by his orphanage peers, he adopts that identity and stubbornly refuses any suggestion of his humanity. His narrative is recorded on tapes given to him by an exploitative journalist. His tale is similar to that of an individual Indra Sinha met in Bhopal, except that his bent back and non-human self-conception are Sinha's invention, although similar mutations are cited in real-world explosions' wake. Criticism on the book centers around Animal's subversion of the concept of the human, on what the book does to intervene in the ways international communities distribute risk and address disaster, and how it dismantles respectability politics held in place by hegemonic norms. I attempt to follow these appraisals by locating them in the figure of the mutant, and by analyzing how it can provide a more open form of identification than that of the human, how the former relies on obscurity yet demands specificity, and trespasses borders and definitions, where the latter relies on strict oppositions and fictive binaries. Much of the world portrayed in Animal's people would be obscured by the traditional approach to representing the disenfranchised displaced by a dominant tribe of neoliberal humanist universalists. In Another World by Justin Omar Johnson, he writes that, quote, rather than providing the framework for a political community yet to come, the discursive promise of universal rights for Animal only stands in the way of constructing a future political community that can match the environmental technologies of neoliberal globalization, unquote. As will be laid out below, Animal's mutant reality is continually met with ignorance from even his closest friends. His life story shows, first, the ambivalence of the human community to those who fall outside its narrow field of relevance, and second, the human's inability to perceive anything outside its narrow field of perception. I would offer that Animal's people vindicates a mutant form of the humanist vision, one which actually does unify all earthly inhabitants as mutants, while recognizing that these creatures inhabit differing, divergent situations which call for fittingly specific yet flexible solutions. Especially in this Anthropocene era marked by the point of no return for global CO2 levels and the ever-increasing toxification of the global ecology, a mutant form of ethics, which makes way for the non- and post-human, is vital for any sort of harmonious future to flourish. Animal models a form of being with that accommodates the world of the apocalypse, his adapted word for apocalypse, towards which we are headed. Sinha has constructed a website for prospective Kovpur tourists to visit, kovpur.com. It offers a host of informational tabs, from a history part which boasts, quote, few cities can equal the scenic grandeur, equable climate, checkered history rooted deep in tradition as Kovpur, to a horoscope section, complete with ads for essential oils. There's even a matrimonials tab, which features various characters with stock-like profile pics, including our Animal, whose bio reads, quote, young guy seeks girlfriend. How a person looks, it's not so important as what's in the heart. I am a sincere person, what about you? End quote. There's also an Indra Singh, whose name bears an uncanny resemblance to one Indra Sinha, but whom is casted as female. In any case, this parodical website nowhere mentions the disaster Kovpur comes to be defined by. This absence reveals how the officials governing Kovpur wish for its continued draw for tourists and business, how they gloss over certain unsavory aspects in favor of creating a seductive image of an inhabitable, palatable image which caters to the Western eye. In order for business to run as usual within the neocolonialist regime, truth must elide. To engage intelligently with the metatextual world that Sinha has constructed, the vision with which one has been trained to see must refocus, offering a first glimpse into how a mutant might look. In his essay, Animal's Eyes, Spectacular Invisibility, and the Terms of Recognition, Andrew Mistalt analyzes how the novel portrays an obscuration of the real, performed by Animal's translators, the spectacular demands of the media, and the deceptive PR campaigns of the industrial companies who extract profit at the expense of subaltern bodies. Mistalt writes, even when the poor are seen, they are misrecognized, envisioned through the spectacles shaped by unself-consciously received narratives of destitute and hopeless, or alternatively, romanticized and idealized poverty. Unquote. So, when attempting to portray or comprehend the existence of communities and bodies outside of our normalized reality, two distracting stereotypes emerge. The hopeless subaltern who is beyond help, and the romanticized one who need not be. These visions are distorted, yet they constitute the norm of what the global middle and upper classes perceive. One must find a way to alter one's vision in order to see through them. Sinha provides tools for this adaptation by mimicking the devices used to make palatable a foreign reality, allowing readers to become conscious of the ways in which they are misled by such devices. The mockery begins before the narrative does, through contradictions in the editor's note which prefaces it. The note reads, quote, true to the agreement between the boy and the journalist who befriended him, the story is told entirely in the boy's words, as recorded on the tapes. Apart from translating to English, nothing has been changed. In one sentence, this editor claims that the following story will be told entirely in the boy's words. In the next, they specify that this is true apart from translating to English. These two incompatible sentences, easily glossed over, reveal that this narrative caters to Western readers' limited linguistic comprehension, while selling itself as fully authentic. This feint underlines the deceptiveness of the Western desire to consume the real, to understand things as they stably, definitively are. It also reveals the West's inability to comprehend alternate realities. Even anything outside its common language falls on deaf ears, evades its perception. Thus, going forward in considering this text, one must accept that one's understanding of the events portrayed therein are already warped. The original Hindi will never be recovered, and since we only have the copy touched by the editor, and since the editor has already been exposed as unreliable, there is no fully authentic text to reference. We have a warped text based on a warped reality, based on a real-world location, whose reality itself has been warped by Western desire. In order to comprehend this reality, one must change the way they look. Animal discusses the gaze we create as we read his narrative, by visualizing it, again providing readers self-consciousness. As he grows accustomed to recording his narrative onto the tapes given him by the journalist, he confronts the reader by implicating our imagination in his reality. Quote, whichever way I look, eyes are showing up. They're floating around in the air, these fucking eyes. Turning this way and that they are, looking for things to see. Unquote. This passage reveals the invasive gaze with which the Westerners investigate the plight of the exploited subaltern. Like drones, the eyes animal sees hover all around him, subduing his privacy. They are looking for things to see, hungry for any spectacle they find. This invasive surveillance is emotionally removed from animal's plight, yet still trying to explore it against its will. The use of fucking as an adjective connotes this sense, as does animal's statement that he tried to hide from them at first. It does not appear that these eyes are interested in being with animal, but only wish to objectify him for their own sadistic or pathetic ends. But animal soon develops a method for mocking the desires of these eyes by implicating them in his own bodily experience, allowing us to consume his story only if we are willing to do it from within him. He narrates the following. I'm looking right now at my feet, which are near the hearth. Twisted they are, a little bent to the side. Inside of left foot, outer of right, where they scrape the ground, the skin's thick and cracked. In gone times I'd felt such hunger, I'd break off lumps of the dry skin and chew it. Want to see? Okay, watch. I'm reaching down to my heel, feeling for the horny edges. I'm sliding the thumbnail under. There, see? This lump of skin, hard as a pebble. How easily it breaks off? Chewy as a nut. Now there's no shortage of food. I eat my feet for pleasure. Clearly, if we are to access the details of this creature's plight, we'll have to do it in his terms. As we imagine the scene Animal sets forth, we look at our bent, shriveled feet together. Together, we subject ourselves to abjection, and together we break off a bite and chew it down. Visceral details like chewy as a nut and hard as a pebble act as anchors for our experiences of the simulation, but we likely perceive the scene each slightly differently, customized to fit our own perverse desires. But since we all cannibalize ourselves alongside Animal, he locates himself and us simultaneously. It is as much him doing this as us. The abjection he performs, and we consume and perform with him. Animal's carnivalesque antics here soften the boundaries between himself and the readers, helping to strain the trappings of normative self-conceptions. In assessing the limitations of laughter in Indra Sinha's Animal's People, Heather Snell writes, quote, Animal's willful transgression of fictional boundaries is reflected in his tendency towards abjection, the horrifying reminder of the loss the subject sustains in their separation from the mother, and which they must continually expel in order to properly occupy the symbolic. Uniting Julia Kristova's concept of the abject and Bakhtin's Carnival, Snell identifies that Animal's in-our-face style of subversion acts as a crude reminder of our fleshly existence and the base horror of it. The symbolic order held in place by countless societal codes in much of the developed world shield us from understanding this reality. The separation from the mother references a rupture in the seamlessness of embodiment. The human exists in paperwork, in monetary systems, in linguistic codes and social media. Rarely is it conceived of as an amalgamation of organic matter, no two models quite alike, something which survives only in tandem with its surroundings, malleable and porous. But by identifying readers into his body, Animal reminds us of our own multiplicity. In this conjoining of his own experience and the reader's, he registers an analog between us. His flesh, wrapped up in text, becomes the conjunctive material between disparate experiences.
You so sick, if you'd rather be with him, go come fuck medicine. You so sick, if you'd rather be with him. I'm not the repent, beating with him is a sin. Go to them, if you wanna be with him. You're so fin, you're so fin, you're so fin, you're so fin, you're so fin.
Yeah, so something after listening to parts of the first thing that we did, I was thinking like, I think we should maybe be a little more explanatory with some things, because like maybe you and I know, like on some, I don't know, personal or friend level, or like based on things that we've read, but like, so I might just start by asking you a pretty like general question about why this book, what were you thinking about at the time that like started this project, like of thinking about mutants and community, and yeah, like what led you to this book? And if you wanted to talk also about why, actually that's another question, if you want to respond to that, but also
I mean, I feel like that's a pretty broad question, and it's kind of like the point of the essay and also of this podcast. Right.
But like, what were you thinking at the time, or what was happening? Of like, why? Because this was like, you wrote this and read this at a specific time in your life.
Okay, sure, yeah, cards on the table, So basically, there's a lot that goes into this, but and this is something that I was kind of thinking would come up more gradually, like in the process of this project unfolding. But it kind of makes sense to like, we're returning to like 2016 or whatever the fuck, and 2016 to me felt like an apocalyptic break with reality. Ever since 2016, I mean, Trump was elected. It was all over after then. But no, like before then too, around 2015, I had like a crazy mushroom trip, which I won't get too much into right now, but which was very traumatic for me, and which happened on campus at Occidental College. And I was suspended for like a semester afterwards, because essentially I had done way too much mushrooms, locked myself out of my room naked with no towel, and then escaped to the garden, whereupon I lost my ability to verbalize things and could only speak in numbers. And then I tried to communicate with two women to offer me a towel. But there was lots of other components of this that were truly apocalyptic for my worldview. Carson is just holding back his laughter. It was a truly... I
know the story, but I didn't know the extent. I didn't know the thing, like the nonverbal.
Oh yeah, I was in a completely different world. But then I was naked, so it really put me in this position of otherness. No, but but that was a big deal for me, and part of the trip. I mean, I died. I saw myself die in multiple different ways, and then rewind time, and then choose other routes. And I kind of feel like this entire where we are now is like a pocket dimension of the world that we were that sort of branched out from my experience. And I made a pact with God, or something like God, the demiurge perhaps. This is something we'll get into maybe at some point when we talk about Gnosticism. But I made a pact with this being that said, like, okay, you can continue to live, but you have to choose different routes that'll actually make this life meaningful. Like, you can have this opportunity to like choose what kind of life you want to see unfold. And here's the thing. The question kind of is like, do you want to live a life that is just a routine copy of what you expected? Do you want to live a life that's easy and straightforward? Or do you want to face one where you encounter a struggle and you encounter, existential problems and stuff like that? Essentially, and that is the case for the mutant. Because it's like you need to have quirk and wrongness or whatever in order for things to be meaningful, in my perspective. And I don't even know if that's true, but it's where I put the chips for the roulette chips. Because it's like, I think that I would prefer, like, I think that's what I'm supposed to do. Like, and again, this is all very narcissistic and schizo, because I was on way too many mushrooms. They might have been laced with something too. But it feels meaningful to me to this day. And then another thing to this was that there was I was taking a class about violence, depictions of violence prior to this, with a really amazing adjunct professor,
Mrinalini Chakravorty.
And one of the books that she mentioned that I should read based on the things that I was talking about was this book, Animals, People by Indra Sinha. She saw that I was interested in the way that, like, violence, because violence is something that you can't really depict in words. It's not the same until you actually feel it. And so until you're in handcuffs, you can't actually tell until you're naked in handcuffs with your knee bleeding with a bunch of like super fucking muscular guys surrounding you, you don't know what that feels like. And so like you don't. Like I can try to tell you, but that's where words fall short. And then what's funny is that like I had this class, and then like that mushrooms experience, I did experience those things very severely. And I also had this feeling of going back throughout different timelines and, you know, feeling different points where I was both the, you know, it's the feeling of karma, the feeling of like there's times when I've been violent or had violent impulses or crossed people's boundaries in various ways that made them uncomfortable. And those things you also then can feel from the other perspective too. Like I've felt those things as well. And this feeling that it's the thing we were talking about like empathy requiring like experience, you know? So I feel like this book, it's such a long-winded response. I don't know, like, I guess maybe it's really interesting. I wonder if like this will even be at the end maybe, but so this will be a sort of non-temporal episode, I feel like. But anyway, this book, I kind of go through it, but this guy, the protagonist, is traumatized by this crazy explosion that itself implicates the human in a very specific way. Like the global situation that like affirms the life of a human in contrast to other lives. But this person who trespasses the boundaries of the human has been traumatized, but then like has a way of navigating the world that is very, I feel like, compelling for someone, because it's like trying to build community and trying to build connections while also being opportunistic and humble about like what you need as an individual. And I just think it's sort of a good exploration of all the different themes that came about in my sort of psycho, you know, coming of age sort of rite of passage. And also as I said in the essay, like Kofpur is a fake version of a real place. So there's something about like, it's like a fantasy version of the real explosion is just as bad as in the book. Like crazy shit happened, like crazy, and then crazy kind of mutations emerged from it as well. But then the novelist Indra Sinha doesn't make a novel about that. He makes like a fictional version of it. So it kind of plays with that sort of tension between fantasy and reality that the Mutant occupies as well. And that also I've always been fascinated in too, because like I've always been unsatisfied with base reality, right? It's always had to be elevated to some level. So that's something about the Mutant, again, the whole theme of like you need something extra in order to make life worth living. That's sort of been animating my like search for something greater. I don't know. I wonder how long that response was, but
no, damn.
I mean, it was a big question, so.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I was thinking that maybe just starting more general, but sorry if that was rough to go through, like retelling, but I mean, yeah, it all makes more sense now. Yeah, I knew parts of that story, but I don't know if I ever heard everything in full like that.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like that's kind of, you know, all these things were interesting to me before then as well, of course. Like, but there's something about that experience that really solidified it. Like, okay, if you want, it was kind of like me grasping for meaning in this moment of like, you know, of like trial, you know. all these things were interesting to me before then as well, of course. Like, but there's something about that experience that really solidified it. Like, okay, if you want, it was kind of like me grasping for meaning in this moment of like, of like trial,
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I was. Yeah, like similar experiences of like. I don't think I had as much, like, I don't know, psychological, but like, yeah, like being in a hospital and like being in and out of consciousness and like experiencing like just like complete like your body, for me, doing things like involuntarily, like having spasms and having like complete, I don't know, like I had never experienced like something that like I'd always felt like pretty I don't know, like I just mean like a moment of like, yeah, like some sort of separation where you could feel like the tandomness of I don't know, like me being alive in a body, and then like, yeah, maybe it's just like a bit of an out of body thing, like if you're, I don't know, having like in and out of consciousness and like having involuntary like anything to do with that. Yeah, it that changed me as well. And I mean, I still like, yeah, think that informs a lot of what, yeah, we've been talking about. Actually,
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
a quote from your paper that I think like you're talking about this like the like animal is talking about eating bits of skin off of its feet.
Mm-hmm.
And you wrote, but we likely perceive this scene each slightly differently, customized to fit our own perverse desires. And since we all cannibalize ourselves alongside animal, he locates himself and us simultaneously. It is as much him doing this as us. The abjection he performs, we consume and perform with him. I thought that was awesome. That was like the focus on like sensation, like embodiment, and then it was funny because I wrote down like this allowing for like this dissolving of this boundary, or this like maybe it's like a fictive boundary between like the self and the other. And then I think in the next line you wrote like, yeah, animals' carnivalesque antics here soften the boundaries between himself and the readers. I was like, yeah, no, this is, yeah, like I don't know, that part hit for me in a way that was like, I thinking about like him also telling this to a person that I can't remember. Can you remind me what the situation is? He's telling it to like a researcher, or
Okay, so basically he's been given there's a journalist who meets him at the beginning before the narrative begins and gives him a bunch of tape recorders. And so the narrative is him speaking into tape recorders, much like we are speaking into this microphone. But then it's notably translated into English by the journalist, and Animal doesn't speak English. I mean, at least at the beginning of his narrative. He learns it as it goes on, but he speaks Urdu, so...
Correction. Animal speaks Hindi primarily, not Urdu necessarily, although it's possible that he has knowledge of both, as is pretty common.
So it's a translation, and so yeah, but
was this also written in? Was it written in a different language?
Written in English. The author is British and Indian.
Okay.
And he wrote this in English for a Western audience. So that's also, for an English-speaking audience, you know what I mean? So it's another important distinction. Like, he has stakes you know, he can use his own voices, quote unquote, but yeah, but he also is very much aware of this like Western implication in this narrative. Like, so anyway, so like Animal is talking because he basically, had you read the part where he visualizes the reader? He sees them in his reality as floating eyes. So like he's kind of schizo, but but it also like that stuff is real, you know, because like he basically sees the reader as like eyes that are like floating around looking at him, and he's like, okay, eyes, if you want to experience my narrative, here, I'll show you my narrative. Aren't I so decrepit? Aren't I so like weird? Let me like eat my own flesh. And then that forces you not to be a floating eyeball, but to actually come inside him and be like, okay, let's feel this. Let's actually feel this narrative.
Yeah, because it was the part about like the cracked skin on the feet, and like you look down and this is what your feet look like.
Yeah.
And when I was reading that, you know, because I'm reading your quotations of that, and even then I was doing that. You know, I was going through like the bodily process of looking down at my own feet. And you know, and you can feel, because it was also like, I mean, yeah, you got reading recorded, but it was like you slide your like thumb under like the part of skin, and it's like, yeah, like I can, you know, feel all this. It's got some aspects of like, yeah, but sorry, I cut you off. Keep going.
No, it's like, I mean, I feel like that's because like there's an element of animism that is important to the project that we're trying to lay out here, I believe. And again, when do you become aware that like everything is a spirit and stuff? When you're grown up in a culture that tries to very strongly make a divide between those different beings. It's when you're in a similar subject position, when you are popped outside of the normal framework of things, which happens if you've been traumatized, or if you have illness, or if you have to, or hopefully, if maybe there's another way to do it. Maybe you can spread empathy through writing, right? Maybe you can spread empathy through, and but what does empathy do is open for debate. But like the question, you know, you arrive there by, if you want to be empathetic towards things that are not you, then you have to be open to like changing the way that you feel, because if you're going to empathize with something that's not you, then you have to change to get there. So that's going to part of the project, right?
Yeah, that brings up actually another quotation that I had written down. It was you had said, here, let me see. Yeah, you were talking about like all the ways that the text is warped, or the story is warped through different translations, different like mediums, different like I don't know, like I guess like a Western gaze, and like different epistemologies, I suppose. And you said, like, in order to comprehend, so yeah, we have a warped text based on a warped reality, based on a real world location whose reality itself has been warped by Western desire. In order to comprehend this reality, one must change the way they look. And I was curious what you meant by change the way you look, or what you would, if you read that this time around, and kind of, because I was like, to what extent is this like possible?
I mean, it's supposed to be a double entendre, because you can change the way you look. It means that change the way you're seeing, but it also means the way that you see, the way that you look. What does it mean to look a certain way? And I mean, I get into basically drag later on in the essay, and like, this is the idea that like everything is constructed, including your appearance. But I think that, what does it mean to conflate the way? I mean, I don't know. And I think that I'm just kind of like using puns and stuff. I don't really know. Like, a lot of this is just sort of, honestly, part of this essay is just me kind of just winging it too. I got to be completely honest, you know? Because I feel like if you do enough puns and like tricky little shifty stuff, then some sort of like magical sort of like spell comes over susceptible readers. And
Nice.
and it just kind of brings you into the space, right? And so it's more like a vibes based thing sometimes. But okay,
Nice.
like what does it mean to like conflate looking and appearing, you know? And I think that it does mean something because like okay. It just means that you have stakes, you have skin in the game. If you're changing the way that you I think that if you wear a suit, it shapes the way that you navigate your surroundings. And if you wear a tattered t-shirt, it changes the way you navigate your surroundings. And I think you can apply those to the way that you see yourself as a body and the way that you can like navigate your thoughts, you know? Does that make sense at all?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. I guess maybe for people that aren't familiar with like just as a general framing thing of like what are you referring to when you say like the gaze and in relation to the eyes that animal sees or experiences seeing him, I guess.
The gaze. So like there's this concept of the gaze that comes from a lot of different like theoretical texts. But it comes from like a critique of the camera lens of like cinema. I can't remember who originally wrote this, but it was someone who's doing a feminist critique of like the male gaze. And basically the idea is that cameras highlight, pan over, linger on framings that cast women as not like fully human, right? Like they'll like fetishize shots of women in different ways. People took this and ran with it and applied it to all different sorts of different things. The Western gaze, right? The white gaze, the lesbian gaze. Like there's all sorts of different gazes. They've also applied it to things outside of film. So like when you write about I mean, I think that currently we're seeing the gaze be captured by a more democratic populace through TikTok, because there's these two guys in like Raf in Gaza who are doing like, have you seen these guys? Like they'll do different videos each day. They do a video that just says like day 45 of our lives in war zone. And they have you seen these guys?
I've seen some, yeah.
And so they'll just like show themselves doing their daily lives. And it's like today we went and played soccer. I kind of crushed my friend. And then like, but on the way there, they'll show footage of like the devastated, just smoldering, you know, tents of their loved ones on the way there. And then like, but so the gaze has been sort of captured by them in that instance, and they're like, here, live my life with me, like, hey guys. And like that's what we're all doing online too, is like, yeah, and like being like, hey, look at me, like a day in my life. You know, there's a lot of those TikToks too, like a day in my life as like a millennial, blah blah blah. But the gaze is just understanding which body you're putting yourself into to like observe the world around you. There's always going to be a gaze, that a framing of the way that you see things, you know?
Nice. Yeah. I just looked it up real quick. It says this British feminist film theorist Laura Mulvey developed the theory of the male gaze in her 1975 essay, Visual Pleasure, Narrative Cinema.
Right. There you go.
Nice. Well, cool. All right, you want to go to the beginning now?
The beginning?
What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say we should keep going.
Keep going?
Yeah. On the essay.
Yeah. Okay, wait, I have one thing, maybe just from the first page.
All right.
Just as a because I think that this was something that we were trying to get at in the last episode and that maybe we kind of said, but yeah, you have a quote: having been altered inexorably by a form of neocolonialist capitalism, their unimportance to the global upper class has been revealed. The global humanist has used their homes as buffers for dangerous capitalist enterprise, and having poisoned them, banished them largely from the zone of what is considered properly vital. Which I was like, yeah, that is maybe the shift that I was trying to find, was like away from the human and towards life, like the vital, like, and because that's expansive, you know, it's like
yeah,
rather than you get into another point about like the human as like relying on obscurity, I think you said. I can't remember exactly where that was, but like,
well, the human is like an obscure category. This is, I mean, I will totally get into this later. Basically, there's this distinction between zoe and bios, two different Greek terms for life that have different meanings, that are highlighted by Giorgio Agamben, who's like a biopower writer. I literally go into this distinction later on, but like in this essay. But yeah. But okay, it's you know.
Well, then let's get at it.
Yeah, I guess we'll just get into it. I mean, essentially, there's a distinction between proper life and bare life. Proper life being the life of the human and the life of but more specific than that, the life of the like citizen, and then like bare life being the life of everything else. Like, so they're just two kind of like conflicting categories that kind of intersect in a very paradoxical way that kind of reveals something about the neoliberal world order that we live in and why people are so, you know, why we see this bifurcation in the way that we care about things. Like, why is it that so many of us are so horrified by Gaza, but then so many people, like our parents, are still stultified by this thing, and they still are like, can't quite get there, right? And that, yeah. But then, of course, this goes even beyond that, because there's the bare life encompasses non-human life as well, you know. So that's somewhere that a lot of like leftists don't want to go either. So, you know, but
yeah.
All right. Thank you for these questions so far. I really appreciate it. And for the attention as we continue our journey through Animals People by Indra Sinha.
Remain. Dormant bulb, flesh and tooth remain.
This conjunctive quality alludes to a kind of being with shared by the Kofpur community due to its common toxicity. Like a virus, the poison not only affects local inhabitants of the city, but contagiously threatens to infect visitors, such as Ellie, the American doctor who, of her own accord, moves to Kofpur to provide what medical attention she can. New to the scene, she speaks to a mother who empties her breast milk onto the ground rather than feeding it to her child. Quote, says the mother to Ellie, "Our wells are full of poison. It's in the soil, water, in our blood. It's in our milk. If you stay here long enough, you will be too." End quote. If Animal serves readers the mutant, non-human perspective native to Kofpur's apocalypse, Ellie plays the role of the Western humanist ideal, here to convert the unhealthy, deregulated world of Kofpur into a more sanitized one. The mother underlines the inability to intervene in this community without being affected/infected by the toxicity therein. Additionally, as Omar Johnson observes, Quote, she defines being here not as being from here or merely living here, but as staying here long enough for the slow violence of the chemical spill to incorporate one into the networked community of the poisoned. Unquote. This here is not only spatial or geographical, but rather dependent on the state of one's connectedness to the conditions in which Kofpur resides. To be here with its inhabitants, one must realize the mutagenic material integral to this community's makeup. But the shifts to Westerners' frame of reference takes place mentally as well. Directly after the mother mentions the danger to Ellie's decontaminated state, Animal narrates, quote, of an instant, it's like the ground under my feet has turned to water. The young woman seems to be floating on a glittering ocean. The papaya trees are tall, green waterspouts, or else tails of monstrous plunging fish. Unquote. Animal's liquefaction of concrete reality occurs in tandem with Ellie's exposure to the possibility of her own toxification. Perhaps the aqueous symbolism in Animal's vision allows for an entry into the consideration of what Michel Foucault calls the milieu, the space in which a series of uncertain elements unfold. A sort of substance which surrounds agents and conditions their proceedings. The announcement of Ellie's susceptibility to the toxins of Kofpur triggers some surreal understanding on Animal's part of the sharedness of his existence, the mid-place aspect of Kofpur, its halfwayness between the world of standard concrete reality and the apocalyptically surreal. Animal guides readers through a series of negotiations between these worlds that correspond with his and his community's split existence.
All right, stop, because this is, I feel like, yeah.
So maybe we can, like, as a procedural note, like, maybe we can sort of, like, go and you, like, stop me, and, like, your role is to, like, try to make this more accessible.
Yeah.
Or, like, unpack
well,
stuff.
because what I was thinking here, and it was like, you know, if you want to be here, if you want to, like, if you want to experience this place, you're gonna experience it. You're gonna get it. And I feel like it collapses like the kind of like traveler, like tourist, visitor, kind of like you're in the same place but you're not experiencing the same reality, or you're not, I don't know, like you're not experiencing the same place. Like this layeredness of like, oh, there's like what is here's what has been built for you to come as a visitor, but then it's like, oh, like if you really want to be here, then it's basically, like you said earlier, like now you're gonna have like skin in the game as well, literally.
Yeah, I mean, for the sake, so like basically the doctor is there and it's like on a very real level, because like doctors went there, right, is going to be contaminated if she stays there long enough. People to this day are still being born with birth defects in Bhopal. Like, it's still a very densely populated area, but it has tons of toxins that have not been removed from the, you know, it's seeped into the environment. But what's interesting to me about this is that like Animal has this sort of like schizo ability. It's like schizo power, psionics. He has the ability, he has this empathic ability. Like, he sees Ellie encounter this, and then he feels his reality liquefy. And he kind of feels with this poison. He like gets into the liquefied space of this poison. Because what does poison tell us? What does contagion tell us? That like people are porous and that there's like interplay between people. And that's what water is as well. Like, and by extension, Foucault's concept of the milieu is that which conditions things. That like we're all in this pool together, and like different chemicals in the water will shape how we behave. That's the idea of the milieu, you know?
Yeah. No, this is cool because it's like nobody's safe, you know? Nobody is spared.
Yeah.
Like, despite what.
Yes, it's true, but at the same time, there's something about this book being a fantasy. Like, this is where it's like, it's a sort of, you know, again, it's a copy of a copy of a copy, and it's sold for Western audiences. So like part of it is also like this fantasy of us being there, because like we wouldn't be there. At the same time, like we can recognize toxins that we also are part of, and then we also and I think that what he's trying to do, Indra Sinha, a little bit is try to like offer a synthesized version of that toxin that can be a community building tool, actually, weirdly enough. But like at the same time, we're not going to go to Bhopal. None of us are going to go to Bhopal. Like I'm not going. You're probably not going in your lifetime. But at the same time, again, there's, you know, microplastics everywhere. There's like all sorts of contagions, and this stuff is all going to come around one way or another, you know.
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah, and like I can't remember where I heard this or learned this or whatever, but like, yeah, like the amount of toxins, yeah, in like breast milk, for example.
yeah,
It's like, you know, so yeah, and like parts of this are I don't know, fictive to try and like, but parts of it are like, yeah, obviously like that's real. And
yeah. All right, I'm just going to keep pushing along because I think that goes nicely into what I'm saying next. So just as Bhopal splintered into a nightmare and a global center of political discussion after the explosion, Sinha splinters Kofpur off from Bhopal, offloading the exploitation of Bhopal's inhabitants to that of the fictional character within Kofpur. This mirrors the offloading of risk performed by the Dow Carbide Chemical Company in positioning its factory in Bhopal, far away from the American consumers targeted for sales. The risk-benefit calculus performed by this company sees profit as the most important goal. Having a chemical disaster of Bhopal's nature anywhere in America or in one of the wealthier areas in India would have been catastrophic for the company's public image, whereas today it continues to run ads dedicated to the human element. So, with all security calculations in mind, the risk associated with the chemical plant is relegated to a place where it can be built cheaply and where the legal structures at play allow for its deployment. Americans, desiring a cheap product they can use to exterminate insects, offload the fallout associated with such a desire, forget about the living aftermath of such actualized potential, and then arrive, like Ellie, hoping to alleviate the guilt associated with these drastic changes that have occurred in the name of the very human whose sanitized experience led to them in the first place. Even Ellie, the most helpful American portrayed in Animal's People, fails to understand the link between the human and the animal it impossibly seeks to contrast itself with. For example, upon arriving in Kofpur, a government representative provides Ellie with a tour of Paradise Alley, a segment of the town the animal frequents. And Ellie remarks, quote, "Just look at this place. These houses look like they've been built by termites," end quote. Spying nearby, Animal's response is telling. Quote, "Up to that moment, this was Paradise Alley, the heart of the Nutcracker, a place I'd known all my life. Suddenly, I'm seeing it as she does," unquote. Just as Ellie risks toxifying her body by merit of her presence in Kofpur, she just as easily contaminates Animal's perspective on how the village looks. In one moment, he feels comfortable and at home. In the next, the place becomes a depraved and ugly conglomeration. Without Ellie, the inhabitants of Paradise Alley could see the beauty in their home. With her intervention, it becomes something that must be fixed. This is not to condemn Ellie's mission of providing healthcare to those who want it. But due to her entrenchment in the Western ideology of normative development, the side effect of her mission create the painful desire for global standards architecturally, socially, and biologically. However, the terminology Ellie uses in condemning Paradise Alley can be seen in multiple ways, providing a framework with which to discuss the meanings of life. The use of termites to describe the place for Ellie is an insult. But termites create complex social and architectural structures with at least 7 different castes and some of the most elaborate castles in the animal kingdom. Her comment could also serve as a compliment rather than an insult, if seen this way. Perhaps what split the comment, thus, are conflicting meanings of the word life, and thus what it means to inhabit a suitable one. In the opening pages of Homo Sacer, Giorgio Agamben discusses two different Greek words for life, zoe and bios. The former represents the bare life common to all earthly inhabitants, plants, animals, fungi, insects, etc. It is the mere fact of being alive, susceptible to death. Contrasting or complementing this definition is the latter term, which signifies the proper life of the polis. This is the kind of life that the terms get a life or the good life refer to. When Ellie immobilizes her comment about termites, she implies a lack of properness in Paradise Alley. The fact that life inhabits and animates these homes goes without saying. It is in the distinction between life itself and true life that not only walls the human off from understanding its animality, but also creates an unsavory need to build towards normativity, pulling communities of all sorts under the thrall of a sinister, destructive, and rapidly globalizing homogeneous influence. Yeah.
No, that's great. I didn't realize that that's where that came from, of like the like Zoe and Bios. Yeah, the get a life thing also, that made me laugh. I actually wrote down in my notes like forever ago, like what a just like absolutely rude, like how I can find it, but I don't know how that like insult is like so, I don't know, like yeah, like everything that surrounds it, like what yeah, like the definition of life, or like I don't know, like a split. Yeah, life in terms of the polis. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it means that you perceive someone else as like being a failure, a loser, or whatever. It's funny because this last couple of paragraphs are when I get to some sort of dicey territory. I think previous to that, a lot of leftists or like progressives would kind of be on board, kind of, maybe. But now it's starting to get to a point where even I'm looking back on this and being like, okay, this seems a little bit frivolous, maybe in some ways. Because I think that like a materialist analysis of things, one could always make the argument that like this is all stupid, and like basically what matters is that we build infrastructure and build towards things that all people want, right? Like infrastructure, healthcare, blah blah blah, and like. But I think that is like, I mean, and that is certainly true, but like it's also true that like it is a serious danger that we will all end up with McDonald's on our fucking blocks. That we will all end up with like the same copy-pasted urban, suburban like hellscapes everywhere. And that's like bad. That's like really, really bad, I think. So, you know, I think that basically the idea is to try to, how do you, you know, in undeveloped, devastated areas, you still get vibrant ways of life that emerge. So how do you like be with those as we try to do aid is the question. And like, you know, in addition to things like, you know, it's sort of an existential question too about if someone tells you like get a life or be normal or like whatever else.
Yeah.
A lot of the times you want to be like, yeah, a lot of people could use with a little bit more normalness. But I don't know. I kind of am a believer in, I don't know. You'll be cringe when you need to be, and you'll adhere to communal signals when you need to be, you know?
Yeah. But even like how you just said, I liked how you brought up the just flipping it and like, oh, like termites are actually incredible at what they do. Like,
yeah.
They make. So then it's like, it really is, I guess when it's like get a life, when someone says that, rather than it's like, it's actually like building like something else when you're saying that. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. It's more like sharpening the I don't know, like sharpening the narrowness of life as opposed to expanding it. Or,
right. It's saying like that.
So yeah,
it's cordoning off, like, because that's what the human's all about. That's what, you know.
Right. That's the parameters, and slimming the parameters. Because yeah, if you're saying get a life, I mean the assumption is well, like you don't have one. So
Right.
then the insinuation is like you're, I don't know about like less than human, but like you're maybe even less than that. Like I don't know.
Like literally, the Dow Chemical Carbide Company was manufacturing an insecticide.
Right.
And it blew up and killed a bunch of fucking people. Yeah, that's what happened. So like, it had consequences on this human that we're supposedly care about. But a lot of people who use fucking these chemicals relentlessly, they don't care about brown people either.
Right.
It's like literally like I've seen them make comments all the time, calling people cockroaches and stuff, and zombies, and stuff like that. But these are human beings, so
yeah, right. And so it's not even it's not even metaphorical. Like like the anti-life like position is consistent throughout. I don't know, bios. I can't remember how to say it, Zoes.
Well, I don't know.
Like,
I would say that like these people of the polis, these bios people with proper life, are the most like by definition they're anti the rest of life. But I think that the rest of life isn't like, I'm saying like that's kind of, what does it mean to stake your claim in that side? Complicating even further, a conception of life is animal's name. Although the English translation is animal, in Hindi the name this figure receives from a fellow orphan is Janvar, Jungli Janvar. Janvar, meaning either wild, animal, beast, creature, or simply one who lives. This name complicates the simplistic casting of animal as animal. Indeed, for the category of animal to contain meaning to humans, it must be neatly contrasted with them. However, a figure such as animal is neither human nor simply non-human. He occupies a space between or outside these categories. As a beast or simply as a living organism, his name registers a filial connection not only with the people around him, but also the creatures around him, such as Jara, the dog he used to fight over scraps of food with, but who now is his friend. And Ka in a jar, a two-headed baby preserved in a jar, with whom he communicates psychically. The common banner under which animal and all his friends could reside is that of the mutant. All organic life on Earth comes about due to mutation. Not only does it drive evolution, but it also provides the fact of each organism's difference from each other. Calling animal simply animal rather than human works as poorly as calling him human rather than animal. He, like all of us, is mutant, and his visibility as such helps connect him to the struggles of those living within the structures of life proper, as well as outside its bonds. The Oxford English Dictionary has multiple definitions for the word mutant, whose various meanings coexist to underscore how the word as an identity complicates ordinary categorizations of life. The first is a biological term from the dawn of the 19th century, defined as, quote, an organism, gene, etc., which has undergone or arisen by mutation, a mutated form, unquote. This definition describes an empirical method of distinguishing an abnormal member of a species from a normal one. However, pondering the mutant's role in complicating its species' unambiguity recalls Agamben, who reasons, quote, just as belonging to a class can be shown only by an example, that is, outside of the class itself, so non-belonging can only be shown at the center of the class by an exception. When, for example, is a frog no longer just a frog, but a mutant one? To define a mutant frog, one must assume its frogness already, essentially. Yet, to call a frog a normal frog, one must appeal to its difference from, its opposition to, everything non-frog-like. Similarly, animals' rejection of the term human relies on the presumed assumption that he might be human already. However, his separation from the human is defined solely on the basis of his not-two-footedness, which bars him from humanness because of a central trait of the Homo erectus, the erectus part. In any case, the mutant is the biological sense of the word. In any case, the mutant in the biological sense of the word is hard to distinguish from the non-mutant, whereas the human defines itself against everything else. The mutant's else is categorically difficult to locate in the first place. As a mutant, then, animal has quite a variety of organisms with which he can relate. So, yeah, does that all make sense?
I'm following.
Okay, yeah. That kind of talks about what we were just talking about earlier.
Yeah, totally. Like how to defining against as opposed to.
Yeah, and Agamben's thing that like a class can only be shown by an example. So like it can only be defined by something outside of it itself.
Right.
But the mutant is something that straddles that by definition.
Jean Baudrillard has like a kind of similar thing. I think if I'm like remembering this right, where it's like radical alterity. It's like the necessity of something against. I feel like so much of like stuff talks about this, but like I feel like this maybe is getting at what you're talking about with like certain like I don't know, like liberals or leftists of like this. I don't know, like this. Yeah, this like embracing of like the alterity, like an embracing of that which things are defined against. You know what I mean? Of like any like the dirty, the coarse, like Byung-Chul Han also like talks about this in Saving Beauty. It's like it's like I don't know, it's tough. It's like that which makes life possible is also that which is like the gross, I don't know, like all of that, an embrace of the alterity, I guess, as necessary, instead of like this constant striving for like sterile, transparent, like connection.
Yeah, and also like. Yeah, I think it is integral to like my understanding of the left, but like because it is about the good life. It's saying that like everyone should have a good life, right? But the thing is that can be and should be like radically different from person to person,
right?
And like a lot of people homogenize that,
right? And to have the good life, you have to be a certain way. Or you have to strive to be a certain way and change how you look, like in the ways that you have to normalize and strive for whatever, like some normative functioning, but like we know that is like, you know, what's the word, like injurious, like it injures. It's like at the expense of life. So like life proper is at the expense of life, bare life, I guess.
Yeah. At this point, yeah. And I mean, this is also like, yeah, life proper with the introduction of like global extractive, you know, capitalism, I suppose. But also, I think that, I mean, I don't think that communism per se or socialism would be immune to this problem at all. Like, this would still persist through those social forms as well. So like, this is not a post-left critique. It's like a you know, eco-socialist, eco-communist, eco-anarchist kind of perspective that I'm trying to put forth, if you want to put labels on it. If you want to like put me in those things. But yeah. Anyway.
Shall we?
Animal's communicative prowess also serves to connect him with an unusually eclectic group. His linguistic capability comes intuitively to him, as shown when activist couple Nisha and Zafar teach him English. Zafar opens a book about that night, quote unquote, which is easy to read and contains, quote, pictures so people can read and understand, unquote. Animal disdainfully declines and instead picks up a copy of Pride and Prejudice. Reading confidently, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in position of good fortune must be in want of a wife. As impressive as this reading is, being one of the first things Animal reads in English, even this segment from Jane Austen undergoes a mutation in Animal's mouth. The possession of the original novel changes to position. Phonetically, these two words are similar. Also, position makes perfect sense in possession's place. A man could just as easily be said to occupy a position of privilege as possessing one. In fact, this small warp might illuminate more about the workings of capitalist hierarchies than the original text. This passage as a whole illuminates first Animal's impressive language capacity, which upsets the notion that his mental and physical abnormalities might make him somehow disabled, and second, that even though his being is abnormal, his capabilities gravitate towards normativity. Sinha's choice of such a canonical Western novel as Animal's first English utterances deploys this notion. Still, even despite this, his reading deviates from the expected, just as his life does, and I see this as hopeful. Although personally I value Animal's deviations from banal norms of everyday human existence, inhabiting his body and his position does seem difficult, and he continually strives to work towards normativity, which causes him suffering due to its unattainability. After a severe fit of psychosis in which he twitches and writhes and hears phantom voices, Ma Francie, a French nun who loses her understanding of any language but French in the explosion, and who thus believes everyone in Kofpur mocks her by speaking in, quote, bestial tongues, takes him to the hospital. In a farcical sequence full of fainted power dynamics between the whiteness of Ma and the big-headedness of the doctor, and Animal, both victim of psychosis and sovereign translator, the doctor asks what he can do for the good lady. Animal realizes, quote, I can ask him anything, and there's one thing I want more than anything in the world, yet I'm afraid to ask. A desperate business is hope, not to be encouraged if you can be content with small happiness. But the curse of human beings and this animal alike is that whatever you have, always you want more. Ever since I realized my feelings for Nisha, a wish for one thing has been growing in me. End quote. The unique circumstances at play in the situation put Animal at an advantage. He can ask the doctor for anything, rare for a Kofpur inhabitant, due to his ability to parrot/puppet Ma Francie with all her Western privilege. He could ask for medicine of some kind, pills to resell, blankets for his house, any variety of thing. But despite all these possibilities, he asks, quote, Sir, she wishes you to do an operation to make me stand straight and walk on two legs. Unquote. This passage, yeah.
So does he speak French?
No, but he can can pretend. Okay, he's pretending in this scene that he knows how to speak French.
Oh, okay, I got it. Okay.
So like basically, the scene is actually really funny, and like it's hard to do it justice.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
The scene is really funny because like he's been traumatized, and Montfrancy is trying to help him, taking him to the hospital. Like he just like basically had like a mini seizure. So like Montfrancy, who's been traumatized herself to the point where she has this mental problem where she can only speak French, and she believes that everyone else is mocking her by being like blee 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 blee, like making fun of French. So she's like but she was a nun. She's there to do good stuff. So she takes him to the hospital, and the Indian doctor is there, and then Animal, despite the fact that he's like just endured a seizure, he's like, wait, there's an opportunity here. So he pretends that he knows what Montfrancy is saying, and she's like, she's sweet, blah, blah, blah. She's like probably yelling and stuff. And he's like, oh, what she's saying is this and this. And the doctor's, and so he's like, he can negotiate between her and the doctor. So,
Yeah, but she's got like the position as the good woman.
Well,
so she's like,
and it's kind of a stretch on my part again. But she does. She's like, you know, I think it's made clear in the text too that like the doctor's like, oh yes, because she's like a nice white nun, you know, like, and so, you know, there's some deference on the part of this doctor, you know, to her desires. And so Animal's like, I can use this to my advantage. But what does he want? Because he could try to do something more attainable, right? But like, what does he want? He thinks of Nisha, who he's in love with, and he's like, if I could just have a straight back, maybe I'd have a chance.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Yeah. This passage reveals the powerful pull of the normal on the abnormal, driven by desire. Animals' drive to conform to the dominant human phenotype stems largely from an urge towards living out the heteronormative dream of marriage. Note that this desire arises since his crush on Nisha begins. Clarifying his logic, he explains that, quote, over and over I'd tell myself, if only I could stand up straight, it might be a different matter, unquote. Although most readers have relatively straight backs, many who have loved can sympathize with the statement, be it through straightening and whitening teeth, bleaching one's skin, receiving cosmetic surgery to widen one's eyes, putting on makeup, or even simply by dressing. People constantly force their bodies into more trendy versions, since this is what is seen as coveted. Like Animal, even one who embraces their differences from a norm, when given the opportunity, they still will gravitate towards the hegemonic ideals set forth by supremacist notions of correctness.
I feel like this is good. Like this part about like I feel like this maybe is kind of deviating from the like, oh, you should love yourself no matter how you are or something. Yeah. Which really like erases people's like bodily autonomy if they want to be different, or if they want to like alter themselves in some way, that it's like, oh, but you should like be like
just accept the way you are. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, this is where it gets complicated. Yeah, because it's all well and good for me to say, oh, mutants are great, but if you have like missing an arm or something, it's gonna be fucking harder to get. I mean, not always, but like it is hard, man. So like, you know, who am I to say this stuff?
I would maybe make the argument that you don't even like, it doesn't even need to be that, you know?
No, of course.
Just like if you want something, that you should be able to change it about yourself. That it's like it doesn't even have to serve some sort of function or anything. Even if like I don't know whether it's just purely like aesthetic or something that it it would be nice to
it would be nice to live in that world, but we don't. Medicine is not that. That's why I'm interested in this stuff too, because like it would be fucking cool if we could live in a world where we can just like truly change, like choose the body we live in. But we don't live in that world. And like we could get into, this is, you know, sympathy for my incels out there, my femcells out there, but also for my like, you know, fucking furries and stuff. Like it's so many different types of like suspect online types of people who have these feelings, and it's like everyone is lovable, and everyone is like sexually lovable, but there's like more and less to this. I think that's true. And like, again, that's like a suspect line of thinking that I have that a lot of people will be like sussed out by, but you know, calls them like I sees them. But it's more complicated. It's not like, because everyone, we'll get into it. I'll go into it more here. Normative beauty standards and sexuality work to consolidate a conception of the idealized human. If we think of animal and niche metonymically, the passage quoted above reveals how sexuality ties to humanness. Indeed, one of the frail definitions the concept of species relies on is one organism's ability to reproduce with another. Relying precariously on this definition, the label of human withdraws from the impotent and or the asexual. Further, depending on what it means to be capable of exchanging genetic material, it also withdraws from many queer people, from those uninterested in having children, and from those too ugly, quote-unquote, to ever attract a mate. To be fully human means to be attractive enough to other humans to secure a union between sperm and egg. One must be capable of replicating the human the way it presents itself as always having been. This heterosexual desire drives animal towards wanting to look human, and his inability to do so aids readers in uncovering their own unstable relationship to this artificial category. His suprahuman status works on one hand to fetishize him, while on the other hand keeps him from achieving masculine beauty. His friendly rival Farouk observes when he finds animals swimming in a lake, quote, "My God, what a lund. Fucker is made like a donkey." And, "John Var, you are hung like a John Var." Quote, end quote. Animality's ambivalence as a site of both degradation and virility is brought to a point here. Jean Var, as discussed above, implies a bestial quality, which can be read as either a compliment or an insult. Animal exceeds the human in some masculine standards and fails to live up to others, such as having proper stature. But he is certainly not alone in this sense. Plenty of humans fail to live up to normative standards of beauty, or they do so in some ways and fail to in others, just like animal. This is due to beauty's ambiguity as a definitional technology of control, which can be deconstructed, and which fails to fully encapsulate the mutant materiality of bodies. Nor can it account for the infinite slippages between dominant and insurgent desires. If animal can occupy parts of the human appearance and simultaneously animalesque ones, he begins the work of subverting the preconceived human-animal, bios-zoe distinctions. These subversions work similarly to the way that queerness asks one to understand alternatives to being casted so simply as male or female. In Jack Halberstam's The Queer Art of Failure, he analyzes a masculine gender performance by butches. Quote, "All ideal masculinity, by its very definition, is just out of reach. But it is only in the butch, in the masculine woman, that we notice its impossibility." Unquote. The category of the male, although perceived by some as a natural and reliable identity which one can fully inhabit, in truth can never quite be occupied. Halberstam argues that it is in the case of the masculine woman, in the butch, that we can understand the instability of the male category. If a woman can perform maleness as well as a man, the man must understand his own precarious relationship to it, constantly seeking a firmer grip on a category which infinitely retreats from full realization. The same subversive maneuver works to dismantle the notion that the category of the human describes an identity one can fully embody. When animal consistently rejects the idea that he is human, and yet performs human-like traits such as advanced symbolic language capabilities and the desire for human sexuality, his distance from the human helps readers understand their own. Like gender, humanness presents itself as a natural and stable category, but in actuality survives only based on elaborate social structures and linguistic codes, which enforce and reinforce its perceived naturalness and its desirability, and which link it to a normative success and a standardizing development. Okay. like gender,
You want me to?
What? No.
Sorry, I thought you wanted me to interject.
No, just like gender, humanness presents itself as a natural and stable category, but in actuality survives only based on elaborate social structures and linguistic codes which enforce and reinforce its perceived naturalness and its desirability, and which link it to normative success and a standardizing developmental narrative which coaxes conformity with first world ideals of productivity and regulation. Like how queer performances provide an understanding of gender's ambiguity, mutant appearances do the same work for the colonial concept of human superiority. Halberstam's claim that masculinity always evades full realization finds evidence in Animal's People. The morning after getting inebriated beyond comprehension during a holy celebration, Animal awakes to his childhood crush Anjali curled next to him. She reminds him that his friendly rival Farouk had dropped him off at the brothel wherein she worked the night before, and that she was the only worker who would take him in, but that they did nothing except paint each other different colors. When she offers her body once again, Animal attempts to fulfill his end of the bargain, but, quote, "At this moment, when at last I could have my desire, enjoy the pleasure of which I'd so long dreamed, my big, boastful, out-of-control Lund won't wake up, deep asleep bits, or cringing in fear," unquote. This act, which Animal has coveted all his life, or at least since he can remember, this thing which has haunted him and led so many of his thoughts, cannot happen when made possible. Although erectile dysfunction may be cited as the reason behind this inability, erectile dysfunction so often works as a cover-up for understanding that one's body's desires in actuality do not align with those one desires one's body to desire. Perhaps what Animal wants is not so much intercourse as it is recognition as a lovable member of society. Attributing his Lund with the adjectives big, boastful, and out of control helped to align that symbol with traditional masculinity. Perhaps, if read allegorically, the scene symbolizes again what Halberstam offers, that the desires and acts attributed to masculinity can never fully articulate a stably nor fully male subject. All males vary to some degree from the expected paradigm set forth by that label. Although Animal attributes his inability to live up to such expectations to his lack of humanness, I would offer that the human itself plays a role quite like that of man. As reality TV and drag star RuPaul sings in Born Naked, we're all born naked and the rest is drag. The identificatory mantles one equips, by their very nature, are constructed socially.
All right.
Um.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, this is just like, breaking apart like stable categories of things. I like how there's like emphasis on, how even those categories, even as things are challenged, say by like the category of man challenged by like butch, is like, oh, but then there's still like these categories aren't stable. Like there's there can be a gripping or a tightening of it's in flux. There's like so many other attributes. So
Halberstam's claim that masculinity always evades full realization and finds evidence in Animal's People. Wait, no, I just did that. Okay. RuPaul's universalization of drag not only unfastens the security sewn into normative gender, but also unlocks an understanding that one's self is constructed, and that thus one may form oneself in ways other than what was once expected. As Judith Butler writes in Gender Trouble, Feminism, and the Subversion of Identity, quote, "Construction is not opposed to agency. It is the necessary scene of agency, the very terms in which agency is articulated and becomes culturally intelligible," unquote. That gender is constructed does not imply that one should identify as nothing, but rather that one has the tools to recode one's manifestation of the cultural and aesthetic matrices one encounters. As drag works to dismantle the strictness of certain binaries, male versus female, natural versus artificial, So mutantness works to dismantle those of human, non-human, of species, and potentially of sentient, non-sentient. Understanding one's ability to embody the mutant means coming to terms with a more experimental, open, and accepting selfhood. This provides a link between the mutant and the queer. Indeed, not so long ago, queerness was casted as a mutant form of identification, in that it deviated from the standard so explicitly. Rather than seeing this mutantness as negative, I would posit it as a form of hopeful divergence. Queer performance is not more or less mutant than straight gender expression. It only appears so. This applies as well to animals' mutant body. Spectacularly different, but only due to its deviation from the standard. That touches a little bit on the theme of like this constant becoming that you talked about in the last episode. It's like this process of becoming, and this you need to like break stuff down.
Yeah.
Judith Butler says you need to deconstruct stuff in order to have agency. You have to be able to like deconstruct stuff. Another link between animal and the queer arises in their shared societal link to the dead/undead, a sort of modification of the commonly accepted notion that life's duty is to raise a generation of offspring and perpetuate itself. Lee Edelman seeks an alternative to this ethos in The Future is Kid Stuff, claiming that queerness, quote, figures the place of the social order's death drive. A place, to be sure, of abjection, expressed in the stigma, sometimes fatal, that follows from reading that figure literally, unquote. Throughout the queer struggle for recognition, the child has generated anxiety in the hearts of the mainstream. The child would be corrupted, would be disallowed development, would fall from the sacred role of cultural regenerator, if the queer were allowed full realization. Queerness thus plays the part of the societal death driver, that is, asks the cultural self to reevaluate the merit of normative reproduction. Although some in the queer community seek only a chance to assimilate into straight normative culture, through marriage, rights, etc., others recognize the potential of embracing shorter lifespans, of declining to reproduce, and of exchanging the burden of the future for the relative freedom of the present. Animal occupies a similarly split place, on one hand wishing for the standard marriage of a human, while on the other embracing his uniqueness as, quote, the only animal that will never find a mate because there's only one, end quote. Similarly to how queerness forms in opposition to a normative reproduction, Omar Johnson claims that animals' empathic connection to a community of humans and non-humans, quote, follows the pathways of a poisonous touch opened by the factory's chemicals, end quote. Everyone in Kovpur finds common ground in their toxicity, the alteration to their biological functions. In Bhopal as well, many phenotypic anomalies spring up to this day from the real-world toxins polluting the area, from cleft palates to birth defects, lung problems, and psychological variances. Although the terror of the explosion cannot be forgiven, like the colonial history of so many places, it cannot be negated, but only adapted to. Omar Johnston identifies animals' community building as, quote, a reverse-engineered mode of resistance, unquote. The apocalypse becomes host to a community of mutants who may have been tortured, but who nonetheless evoke a reevaluation of what life can be. Animal need not find a mate to provide the world with his influence. Rather, his existence as a kind of prosthetic and symbolic rupture in our calculation of what the good life is already helps coax new forms of being. Although this empathic community forms in relation to the real world, it also creates a relationship between fantasy and semi-fantastical creations, once again asking us to question our preconceptions of life. For example, Animal befriends an unborn two-headed fetus, known as Ka in a jar, who introduces him to a series of other formaldehyde-preserved children, calling themselves the board of directors of the poison Wallace shares. Because the poison this board refers to has tortured him, Animals at first recalcitrant to this community of the unborn, but they explain that, quote, not only have we never lived, but so long as we are stuck in this situation, we will never die. You see our problem. And sometime we realized the company also never dies, so we formed the board, unquote. These creatures are the residual of the trauma the American company has wrought. Phantasms though they may be, the same could be said of the entire town of Kofpur. It is a fictional reflection of the real-world truth, wrapped up in text. But by allying Animal with these ghostly beings, Sinha invites readers to participate in their mission. Quote, instead of breaking ground for new factories to grow grass and trees over the old ones, instead of inventing new poisons, to make medicines to heal the hurts done by these poisons. Unquote. The novel takes place in a fictional reflection, but it reflects real-world imperatives. These beings, partially forgotten, reclaim a voice in the mutant community of resistance, formed in tandem with encountering the poisonous and corruptive forces of neocolonial capitalism. Following so far? Everything? You with me?
What? Yeah.
This fictitious mutation of reality invokes the second meaning of the word mutant, provided by the Oxford English Dictionary, which it gleans from the genre of science fiction. The OED reads, quote, an individual imagined as having arisen by genetic mutation, especially one with freakish or grossly abnormal anatomy, abilities, etc., unquote. Like the first definition the OED provides for a mutant, this one also is open to multiple different conceptions. On one hand, it describes the world of superhero comics like X-Men and Spider-Man, narratives of people exposed to mutagenic substances which grant them superhuman powers, yet which partially banish them from the human realm. On the other hand, it makes up the stuff of horror, such as Frankenstein's monsters case, where mutation provides not so much an ability as marks the mutant out as an abnormal outcast. Animal can be seen combining both aspects of this ambivalent definition. He is either a superhuman with amazing communicative skills and psychic abilities, or he is a freak whose mind and body are bent into horrifying and ugly shapes. However, conceiving of a community of such mutants would mean attempting to see beyond the distinction between them, to see the powers of a superhero as unimportant compared with the empathy of entities like caught in a jar. Additionally, forging such communities means, to an extent, believing in fantasy. As life proper, distinguished from bare life, creates the basis for certain political imperatives congealed within the neocolonial humanist mission, so too does a distinction between fantasy and reason. Achille Mbembe describes this in Necropolitics. Quote, it is on the basis of a distinction between reason and unreason, passion, fantasy, that late modern criticism has been able to articulate a certain idea of the political, the community, the subject, or fundamentally, of what the good life is all about, how to achieve it, and in the process to become a fully moral agent. Unquote. Although it may appear intuitive to support rhetoric that rationally posits certain lifestyles as superior, more desirable, and thus to defend the distinction between fantasy and reason, The side effects of the rationally supported good life, as it operates in the world today, must be evaluated. We now have, as reasoned by the Geological Congress in Cape Town, entered the Anthropocene epoch, an era marked by humanity's permanent toll on the Earth. The good life, defended by the rationality and developmental narratives, has produced irreducible CO2 levels, which will lead to ecological devastation. It has bred a slew of new species for its consumption or entertainment, such as turkeys too swollen to reproduce naturally, and dogs which are born into bodies with built-in health problems. And islands twice the size of the United States have formed from trash in the Pacific Ocean. The human, by its own metrics of rationality and well-being, has warped its own habitat to the point of a surreal rupture and the very nature of nature. The sane world of the industrial citizen has produced its own feverish nightmare, and yet we will manage to distract ourselves with the fantasy of unperturbed normalcy. Rob Nixon attempts to struggle against such slow-paced alterations in his book Slow Violence. He writes, quote, "Chemical and radiological violence, for example, is driven inward, somatized into cellular dramas of mutation that, particularly in the bodies of the poor, remain largely unobserved, undiagnosed, and untreated." Unquote. Citing the writer-activist as a helpful figure in resuscitating care for such figures in a different work, he argues that, quote, "Sinha has created in his picaresque novel, Animal, a potent compression of disturbing porous ambiguity, a figure whose leakiness confounds the borders between the human and the non-human, as well as the borders between the national and the foreign." Unquote. An irony emerges. On one hand, these untreated cellular dramas of mutation are the very thing to be combated. On the other, they provide humans a reevaluation of their selves and societies. As Animal says to the poison while aboard, quote, "You are fooling yourselves if you ever think you can change the company. It's too big and too powerful. It cannot die." Unquote. This may provide a realistic understanding of the apocalyptic growth of industrial capitalism. Perhaps attempts to see, diagnose, and treat animals' ailments simply bolster the very machine that led to his state in the first place. If he were simply human, where would this narrative's intervention relocate itself? Rather, what would it mean to embrace Animal as an icon, to take on his behavioral and social adaptations, see his lifestyle as good enough, if not better, to look beyond nationalism, anthropocentrism, or logocentrism, to a more accepting ethos that provides practical aid when requested without judging the abnormalities that will inevitably continue to erupt from our swiftly morphing world. The world into which we head already finds representation in Animal's people. Not quite an apocalypse, but something like it. As Animal says close to his narration. As Animal says to close his narration, quote, "We are the people of the apocalypse. Tomorrow there will be more of us." Unquote. This might come across as a warning or portent to some readers, but it hits me as comfort. If Animal and the community Sinha synthesizes around him are the kind of community waiting beyond the rupture of the neoliberal world of stagnant replication of norms and aesthetics and capital, what is there to fear? Policy-wise, we should at least acknowledge the unevenness in the deployment of toxins we use to create safe havens for certain classes of humans, and be willing to erect them within our own homes, if at all. The death of such a system as I find myself surrounded by in America would not so much destroy my way of life as open it up to new forms. The world will not stop changing, and I believe it is a social, ecological, and theoretical imperative to cease pretending that we cannot change with it. So I feel like that ending is a little trite. Overall, I feel like some of these points are a little simplistic, but and I feel like it's kind of open-ended. It kind of leaves you. I don't think I've really made much progress on it since then, but I think that some of my phrasing about like, I don't know. I think that some of my phrasing about like the neoliberal world order and like humans and stuff could be sharpened a little bit to be more specific. And I think I could have done more to look at the ways in which, like, what does it mean to supply basic, I don't know, what would that effectively look like if we're trying to intervene and apply humanitarian aid? But I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, wait, so yeah, what parts are not sitting, I don't know, so well with you? Yeah, like, do you feel like you just used like neoliberal, like neocolonial?
Yeah, sort of some hand waving, like humans, Western humans. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So wait, so what do you think it could be sharpened to? Like now that you've had some time.
I don't know. I think that maybe and maybe it just needs to be expanded even. Maybe it is specifically about humans, you know? I mean, I'm so like insecure with my thinking that like I don't really believe anything, but at the same time I can be convinced of like anything too. but I mean I do kind of stand with what I'm saying here. But it is kind of like I can just hear a lot of people being frustrated with like eco leftists, you know, because they're like, we've got so many like things so many things come before worrying about like whether we use pesticides or like whether we can go around on all fours or whatever, or call ourselves humans. Yeah. There's so many more principled things that need to come before then. But I think that the argument of the essay, if I were to flesh it out more now, I would maybe even respond to like leftists as opposed to liberals. I would be like, from a leftist perspective, like, let me like look into that. Maybe I can try to do more of that with this podcast project, because like these are things that I truly believe in. But I think that there is a real problem with the way that we orient, like, it's a problem with telos. It's a problem with taking for granted what people want. It's a problem with like people assuming that they know what they want. And it's also a problem with like who matters in the calculation of us, you know, of like the people. Like it's not, you know, so.
Yeah. I feel like, well, just to offer up something is like, I feel like you can be talking about those things, like making a more, I don't know, deeper critique of everything that you just named. And if someone is like, oh, we shouldn't worry about like, or now is not the time to worry about whether we use like pesticides, or whether someone like what the definition of human is or something. But it's like, but it is like, and those things, of course, as we know, inform the very like you can't even say any of those things without the stuff behind it of like I don't know why this is coming to me, but that scene in have you seen Devil Wears Prada?
Sure.
There's that iconic scene. It's like that moment where Anne Hathaway says something about like, oh, like, I don't even remember what she says, but she's kind of making like kind of a critique about like, oh, like what does this matter? Like, between like this and this, it all seems like frivolous. I'm probably butchering this, but then Meryl Streep has this whole monologue about like everything that like you have like allows you to even understand these like categories or like these colors and designs and everything has all been like previously like talked about and argued about and like meticulously like constructed, and it's kind of, I don't know, it's like that's for some reason what I'm thinking about in terms of like if someone like brings a critique of like, oh, now's not the time to be like talking about this, like we have more like pressing material like matters or something. It's like, well, yeah, but it's also, you know, it's always the time to be like deconstructing these things, as you said, like the Judith Butler quote, like deconstructing in order to like, I don't know, create space for what is to be like in the future.
Yeah. Like,
I guess I'm just saying, like, it's always the time, I think, to, and in fact, like, it's probably the best time because people like don't really do that enough. You know, there's not even like enough time like to contemplate any of this, and like, you know, in for most people, like on a day-to-day basis, it's like, so when are we gonna do that? We're just gonna keep barreling on with like, oh, like pesticide. I'm not. This isn't to say pesticides are good or bad.
Yeah,
it's just like, you know, it's like
it's a good example though.
Yeah.
Yeah, when are we gonna find the time? When, I mean, and this goes back to the very like, you know, the personal level of like what this practice of this podcast is too. It's like, it was really hard for me. It's, you know, it's depressing being dialed into what's happening in like the genocide that's happening at Gaza. It's depressing because like, what can you do? Well, I mean, like, I should get involved. Like, I should try to like find networks of people that can talk about stuff that we can't talk about, and that we can like do things together, and we can like show up for that. We can go to, you know, protests. We can spread the word. But like, it's equally important to figure out, I mean, it kind of leaves us all wondering, it leaves me wondering, like, what am I supposed to be living for in the face of that? And I think that
Yeah. Oh, I guess that's also like, you know, like that's also missing that like this emphasis on like action. Like we know that these things, like even just some of the stuff that you named, like has been, can be, and will be like co-opted and like reabsorbed, and like, so to consistently like think about it, or like to deconstruct, like, for example, what are the parameters of like human? How are these parameters being like, I don't know, sharpened right now? Or like, I feel like people keep saying like how do the contradictions like become sharpened in like moments like, yeah, like genocide in Gaza, like, and it's like, oh, now's not the time to like be thinking about these things. But it's like, if we're not thinking about these things, we are susceptible to just blind like action towards ends that might not even be like what we're thinking that they're for, or like they might just be pure spectacle, or they might just be, so
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. It's true. Like, well, okay, like I said at the beginning of this, like for me, the impetus of the whole Mutant project or whatever was a reckoning with like this moment of like losing faith and feeling like I was dying. And I feel like you mentioned that too, being in the hospital bed. You really reckon with everything. And so I think that it's true that like in moments of like deep crisis and like those are the moments that test your faith, and those are also the moments that require you to like search for meaning.
Yeah.
And I guess
And
if
to
nothing else,
choose
it shows you that like this, again, like, right, like if you're going to be living on, then this can't be it. This cannot be it. Like there's got to be something else to do. Like I've just been playing so much World of Warcraft. I've been trying to stop drinking, and but then I just game. I'm just gaming.
Yeah. What
It's
is
like,
to be done? It's to play more work.
yeah. And I mean, there's something to be said about any kind of escape as valid. I would like to talk about this like leftist RuneScape group that our friend and also my other friend actually are like best friends in this space. I didn't know.
Nice.
But I would like to have them on and talk about that. But because there's something about virtual worlds too that is like just as fair as anything else. And I think it's totally okay to just, there's no right, there's no right way to be, because but it really makes you, yeah. If nothing else, I guess this time, how can we relate the essay, the frivolity of the essay, to the severity of the moment? Well, if nothing else, it goes to show that the human as a subject is completely severed. When people say like, I mean, but then like, I guess a lot of people are trying to say that we should care about all humans, And again, though, I mean, yeah, and we definitely should. Like, but I guess it just is like we have to evolve with the times, like, and I mean, this is also like there is a larger massacre on the horizon. Like the global south is gonna be fucking frying like a damn egg. And it's like
not even global south, like it's predicted to be like the worst hurricane season of like ever, even for like New York City. Like this is no longer, just like, yeah, I mean, not that it's hard to talk about this always like this, because it's always like, oh, it's now a problem when it's
yeah. And it's like also you don't want to compare it to, because like there's some things are human action, some things are more systems
also,
that just build up. But
actually, Jackie, there was something I wanted to bring up that I've been keeping kind of just like some tabs on some things of like, I've now seen and read about multiple like airlines, like flights within the past like 2 weeks or whatever, that people have been like killed and like injured, like spinal cord injuries, like traumatic brain injuries from turbulence alone. It's happened like here, I'll just because I wrote this down. There was like a flight from it was like Singapore to Ireland or something. That like they experienced such severe turbulence in the course of like a second that like people just were rocketed to the top, like to the roof of the plane, like, and slammed like back down to the point where there are people that are still like dozens of people that have been hospitalized in like critical care with like traumatic brain injuries or like debilitating like spinal cord injuries, and people died. Like, and then it was interesting to go through the comments, of course, of like on like Instagram, have people be like, oh, is turbulence really caused by climate change or something? And then have other people be like, I'm a pilot here of 35 years and can attest that like turbulence is way worse than it ever used to be. And like, so it's, I don't know, things like, yeah, like when we're talking about like, I don't know, just from this novel of like a Western gaze, the relationship between like time and like a slowing down. I liked at the end like this like like a slowing down of was it slowing of injury or slowing of you know what I'm talking about at the end of the essay?
There's this concept called slow violence, which is like the violence that we can't see because it's so slow.
Right. So I don't know about like the relationship between like oh, we're thinking about like a plane ride or something, which is something that I have such intense like anxiety about flying, but like reading stuff like this and hearing about it, it's like it makes me want to like, you know, not go anywhere, like not fly at all. And I don't know, like the ways that is now becoming something that's like, yeah, like leaking into my everyday life as someone who lives in the northeast of the US and is white, like, you know, so it's like we do have to grapple with these things intensely now,
right,
like on a intellectual theoretical level.
And I guess that's another point. It's like it's not about us being, you know, we're not going to save anybody by caring about them, right? Like we're kind of beyond that point. Like it's not gonna. We can try to shape the way that our governments make policy, but they're fucking inhuman. You know, the human concept is gone. So what I'm saying is that we also need to. Yeah, I guess what you're saying, and what I'm kind of hinting at with this essay is like, or what Animal says in this essay is that like, we are the people of the apocalypse. Tomorrow there'll be more of us, and like.
Mm-hmm.
And like there's gonna be so like how it's like we need to look to him not just as someone to save, but he's like an example of how to navigate apocalyptic territories.
Yeah. And when you read that, you know what I also thought about is just like, you know, the so many hundreds of thousands of people like worldwide, but in the US that are dealing with like debilitating things after having COVID, or like I don't know, like I mean, the
people.
Way that...
There's plenty of absolutely devastated terrains in your average city. Like in Minneapolis, you can go around and see some like truly, you know, like from drug dependency and like the weird kinds of drugs that we see to like intense impoverishment. Mm-hmm. To all kinds of like health issues that are like untreated.
Right. I guess I'm just trying to shift like because that stuff is so like stark in your face. But even then, like
right. But then
like
but then
politicians still like don't care or whatever, or like not even politicians, because they don't even do anything. Like the forces of, I don't know, capital, like they're completely ambivalent to human life. So it's like, or life in general. Yeah. And so like I'm thinking about this like slow burn, this like slow violence of like, oh, but like now we're coming to terms with this more, and maybe I'm just thinking about this too in terms of like chronic illness and stuff, and also like the aftermath of like just, oh my god, like the like people in Gaza and Palestine, just like, oh, like how all of this is going to, it's not just a now thing, you know, it's like the effects of this are of course going to be for decades, for people on a personal level, for people on a cultural level, for people on a familial, like it's, I don't know, it's like the scope of what we're talking about is huge. Like, it's not like so immediate action now. And I know that I don't mean to say like there isn't things that we can do right now, but it's more like we got to keep the scope in mind. We got to plan.
That's a good point.
You know, 50 years like down the road, because like like we got to have some sort of organized, principled, I don't know, way of thinking through these things in order to develop what we're trying to develop. And so then we don't even need to think about it. Then once things happen, once something happens, once there's another Hurricane Katrina, once there's another like horrific, I don't know, then it's like, boom, we've already thought through these things. We know where we stand. We like, you know, that's the argument that I've heard a lot of people that are in more like I don't know, like organized, like groups where it's like we've already figured this out, like
Yeah, you're trying to like
to some degree of,
prefigure,
like
trying to like prefigure something. So like, you have the strategies of, because I mean, another thing I would have liked to maybe highlight in Animals People is the idea of mutual aid as opposed to charity, right? Or like international aid, which is good, but there's this big, like community aid, like actively searching for symbioses between you and your neighbors is like a skill that's going to be really important. I'm really bad at it. I can't. It's like hard for me.
Yeah, but it's also like that it's not always about like the constant emphasis on repair as the only like thing to do, but it's like, oh, like we gotta stop what's causing the harm in the first place. Like we gotta what was it, the like you're a fool if you think you're gonna change the company or something, like
it's too big, powerful to die.
It's that, and then what the Khan and Jar said, that was good. It was like like severing like the source of harm. But I feel like this is something that like, oh, like people, the whatever, like not even conservative critique, but critique from so many people that they just like, oh, you think there's going to be no problems anymore, you think you're going to like eliminate like problems or something, and it's just like,
okay, yes. So sorry,
no, go for it.
Just to get that quote. So basically, they say, not only have we never lived, but so long as we are stuck in this situation, we will never die. You see our problem. After some time, we realized the company also never dies, so we formed the board. So, like, it's an undead community that will never die, just like the company will never die, right? It's like, if it's going to continue forever, we're going to be here the whole time. And then they continue. Instead of breaking ground for new factories to grow grass and trees over the old ones, instead of inventing new poisons to make medicines to heal the hurt done by those poisons. So it just is saying, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward mission, but it's done by these like undead babies that are probably a psychosis of this fictional character in a fictional world by blah, 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 all these different layers of fictitiousness. But you can trace it back to the reality of the moment we're in. And like, that's why we need some kind of, I think we need like a cultish kind of movement. We need like a belief that can animate something. And like, I think that we need to have those like that spirit of like, that's just as like, that can match the like, that can adapt to the situation we're in. We need to have like a spirit of healing and of remediation that that can contest with the spirits of the different companies that we live in the midst of.
Yeah.
And like, what does that come from? It can't come from like work. It's not going to come from labor at this point. Like, we don't have work. We can't get a paycheck from a place that will foster a spirit like that. So labor is kind of out for that kind of thing. So like, we need to form some kind of, but we need something to do that role.
It's also cool because it's like, it's like this, it's also like an anti, like, how people have, in large part defined themselves in the US or whatever for, I don't know, past few decades, is like, buy your work. And it's like, I feel like this detaching not just from what you're saying of like a better world is not going to come through like work as we know it right now, and also like us ourselves like are not going to be like this attachment to work is no longer serving us. Like we all know that it's kind of like, it's just like, we've been psyoped into thinking that work is like a defining feature of yourself, and like that's what the good life is about. And
Yeah.
I don't know, so detaching from those things as well, because I mean there's a lot of work to be done there, but maybe it'll be done for people through basically disaster, which I feel like is kind of, I don't know if it's like an accelerationist argument or something, but like it's kind of just like coming up to terms with like a disaster strikes. I feel like this is what people call like disaster communism, of like what happens after like a disaster like this is like, oh, like all that shit like falls away, and it's like it's almost like it's done for you, like the theorizing is made like in an instant, it's made clear, and it's like, I don't know, like, and sometimes I feel like people romanticize that, but I also am like, is that like what it takes? But we don't want that. Like, we should plan ahead, but we should try and avoid.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think
happening.
being opportunistic about the rifts in the status quo that arise from catastrophes definitely makes sense to me. The sad thing is that this could all be an elite plot, an elite gamble to thin the herd so as to further our positionality within their social structure. If there's too many poor people, if there's too many people with the popular sentiment that rich people suck, then at some point there's too many people. But like, if you cull the herd, then not only do you quote unquote solve climate change according to a lot of these fucking crazy people, but also you have a more suitable, like the workforce is more tight, like the labor market is way more tight, so like,
as in like less unemployment, or what do you mean?
Like
docile,
like no one, you'll take what you can get. Well, actually, I guess
well, I feel like that's against your argument a little bit right there.
No,
that's like this is getting into like the Marxist thing of like like a pool of surplus labor or whatever, that's like, that is necessary for the existence of capital, that it's like
right
you have to have this, I don't know, this underclass, this like undercommons.
No, but if it's too big, then like there's just so much power there, and it's hard to control it all. So sometimes you need to call the herd in order for the remaining people to be completely encapsulated within the society of control. But it's a little bit conspiratorial. But I guess let's just say that
there's more people creating more like surplus profits, whatever, more concentration of wealth into the hands like of a few, then there's like more repression that follows, more violence that follows, which I don't know, like, if this is all like,
no, but I guess maybe. I was just kind of saying that like it's people sometimes, I mean, like, because rich people are going to suffer at the hands of these catastrophes as well, but it just is, and it makes sense to be opportunistic about these openings that climate change offer, because like we have to be opportunistic about any opportunity we can get. But I'm just a little bit, I guess we have to be aware of the. I guess that's why we need to study this stuff too, because, like, I think that
Jackie says, hit the books.
The war in Gaza is like, they're just trying to make more real estate for themselves, and it's gonna be continuing to happen. Everything is real estate, and the gaps created by disasters will be filled one way or another, and there's a lot of like I don't know. We'll see, man.
Yeah, and I mean, even
There's
if
a lot
the
of like
disasters,
tech and power on their side, but at the same time, is the tech and power on their side? I mean, yes, it is, but like, is it on any of our sides?
engineers got to rise up. That's what like.
Yeah,
I don't know. I feel like the politician thing, nobody cares anymore. Everybody knows it's just like this isn't real. Like I don't know. It's like
they need to democratize the software and hardware. They need to democratize the weapons of war. We need to stop. We also need to like intervene in like the military industrial complex. But yeah.
Well, I just feel like these things like are moving past like, and that's what's cool about like what you said about the like a democratizing of like I think we were talking about like the gays, but like TikTok or whatever, that you can see, like we can see what's going on. Like there is no more like it isn't like being filtered through whatever like media powers anymore. So it's like, oh, like once that is like that veil is lifted, it's like politicians are like on some level obsolete, and you like I don't know, once it's just like you're just the thing that like you're just professional liars, like the way that you all are just like distorting like, and every time you see like a journalist or someone try and grill like an American politician about like supporting genocide in the way that they just like slippery, like, but also like we're now seeing like it's like it's cringy, like it's like I don't know, it's like whatever internet lingo is like, it's a cope, like you're not it's none of this is even like, it's all being done in like an engineering like tech warfare level, then like yeah
like
I don't know.
We can all see a bunch of stuff. We see how atrocious everything is. The veils that have worked.
Spectacle is unraveling.
The spectacle is completely unraveling. But at the same time, there's a lot of really powerful interests that have a lot of fucking money and a lot of fucking technology and stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But
yeah,
there's a lot of different questions that arise in the midst of this. But I think that it's about, I think that for me, I always come back to like, I just am trying to make my life livable. Because I mean, that's the main, there's also that. Like, even if everything was all fine, but everything's not fine. So how do I make a livable life in that context? And I think for me, it's like, I'm just trying to like be in harmonious and enlivening connections with people I care about.
Yeah.
Spirits that support me, technology that supports me. And I
like what where you're going with spirits, and also like there needs to be like a I don't know, a cultish like religious or whatever spiritual movement. It can't just be this like, I don't know, can't just be this trust the experts like atheist thing anymore.
I look forward to looking into this more with you.
Me too.
I mean, one of the things I gotta say is that reminds me of the caught in the jar, two-headed babies. Heads and babies. The beheaded children as a specter that was used on October 7th. Hamas came in, beheaded a bunch of babies. And then now we see actual decapitated babies. And then like there's sometimes you hear things that are like, our souls will like never forgive you. Like anyone who is complacent or whatever. I just feel like that, similarly to the caught in a jar, we have these sound bites through social media that have resonated now and like will always be there. And this is like a huge like portal of trauma that is like opening up.
Yeah.
And it's like you know, how do you live with that? But I mean, you do have to live with it, so you know, I think it makes sense to try to like find some kind of spirituality, because these people are spirited people that are being, you know, massacred. And so like, how do we, you know, you gotta honor that somehow. But on the other hand, just spiritually. And I don't think that, I'm not trying to be like everyone should be really ashamed, you know. I just think that it's like important to just meditate on the darkness of this moment, just the darkness of the moment. Just accept the fact that we're in a fucking apocalyptic moment, and like, you got to find some kind of guidance for that. And I feel like that needs to be spiritual. It needs to be something greater than yourself, you know, or at least something. Unless you can find it in yourself, you know. I don't know, but there's got to be some kind of spiritual reckoning with that. Like, you can't deal with that from in a materialist way. You know what I mean? Yeah. But so then, yeah. But also, I guess I'm curious about this figure of the cyborg. Because I'm so enmeshed with my computer, and I'm thinking about all the energy it uses to run like Rust or to do a pirated server of World of Warcraft. How many hours I spend on this thing, how much a part of my life it is, how it connects me to so many things, so much joy, so much like addiction, so much like connection, and so much information, and how I kind of love it, you know, but it's in that conflicted way that I love myself or a significant other. And so with that in mind, I think that would be, I'm looking forward to talking about a cyborg manifesto with you. We can look at it as a suspicious figure and as a hopeful figure, and what does it mean to be partially cybernetic, and what does it mean to be partial, and what does it mean in general.
I'm looking forward to it too.
All right, with that, I am going to sign off on this one. Stop recording.
We're done here.
It's been a long one. Thank you so much for being here, Carson. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. I'm so glad to have heard so many nice things from all our friends who have listened. Please share it with your friends.
Thanks, friends.
And keep telling me topics you'd be interested in covering. I'm looking forward to scheduling these conversations out and continuing to build a nexus of communication and connection.
Join the pool of bare life.
Okay. Oh yes, shape change. Join the pool of bare life.
Pool party. That's why I said pool party.
Shape change in the pool party of bare life. Fair enough.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Goodbye.
Goodbye. I was just stopping.
Yeah, let me do that too.
Forget that when we're marching and protesting, we're tapping on the earth, and the earth hears our cry. And it is not just our marching and protesting that happens, but it's those spiritual, elemental beings that are rising up to help us.
remain